most people. While God provides many messages through the different aspects of the story of Zacchaeus, today God draws our attention to the very ending of the story, when Jesus proclaims, "Today, salvation has come to this house." The message we proclaim today is that salvation transforms our lives. When the wisdom of God enters our hearts, and when the love of God is pleasant to our souls, salvation transforms our lives. The message we hear from God today is that when we accept the wisdom of God and treasure God's promises, salvation transforms our lives, casting out despair and filling our souls with joy and peace. Yes, the story of Zacchaeus is familiar to us. We know the details that Luke tells us about how Jesus was passing through Jericho, just one day's journey from Jerusalem, where he was going to face all the trauma and the triumph of Holy Week. We know about Zacchaeus, who was a Jewish man who had betrayed his own people by becoming a tax collector for the Romans, and who was hated by all of his neighbors. Luke does not tell us that Zacchaeus was a greedy person. Luke tells us that he was rich. But he doesn't say that he was greedy. But we can figure that out. Only excessive greed would make a person betray his own people and extort extra money from his neighbors for his personal gain. We know that when Zacchaeus heard that Jesus was passing through Jericho, Zacchaeus became desperate just to see Jesus. So desperate to see Jesus that he tossed aside all the dignity of his position to climb a tree in his finest clothing. Clothing, by the way, that had been bought by the money that he had stolen from the people in the crowd that day. And he climbed that tree just to see Jesus. Luke does not tell us directly why Zacchaeus was so desperate, but it seems obvious. In spite of his excessive wealth and power, Zacchaeus was empty inside and searching for a deeper meaning in his life. Greed, after all, had not satisfied him. Zacchaeus was desperately searching for peace and joy for his soul. Peace which could not be bought or achieved. Zacchaeus was so desperate for peace that he abandoned all the decorum of his position and made a ridiculous spectacle of himself by climbing a sycamore tree just to see Jesus walk by. He should have been embarrassed by this spectacle, but he didn't care. You see, Zacchaeus was so desperate for something to bring meaning to his life, something that would fill the emptiness in his heart. Greed had been a dead end for Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus was a man in despair. Even though Jesus meant to pass through Jericho on that day, on his way to Jerusalem, when he saw Zacchaeus in the tree, he stopped and invited himself to Zacchaeus' house, much to the shock and the anger of the entire crowd, all of whom hated Zacchaeus. Luke tells us that because of just Jesus' visit, Zacchaeus announced that he was going to pay back everyone he cheated and give half of what he owned to the poor. He was going to restore people 4 times what he may have stolen from them. Well, do the math. Zacchaeus was going to be wiped out. To pay back 4 times what he owed and what he had stolen from people was going to make Zacchaeus poor. This was stunning. This was astounding news. This was nothing short of a miracle. Jesus had transformed Zacchaeus. Jesus had erased Zacchaeus' greed. Jesus had restored Zacchaeus' soul. When he made this announcement, I can't help but think that Zacchaeus must have been overcome with joy and peace. It reminded me of that scene in A Christmas Carol when Ebenezer Scrooge wakes up on Christmas morning. And Dickens described that moment of joy for Scrooge, who woke up and began to run around his room saying, "I don't know what to do," cried Scrooge, laughing and crying in the same breath. "I'm as light as a feather. I'm as happy as an angel. I'm as merry as a schoolboy. I'm as giddy as a drunken man." Zacchaeus must have had the same sort of joy that filled his soul. Just like Scrooge, the horrible burdens of his greed and despair had been lifted, and he was fully human again. Jesus does not tell us how the crowd reacted to Zacchaeus' announcement. I wonder how long it took them before they realized that every household in that town had just won the lottery. However, Luke does tell us how Jesus responded. When Zacchaeus made his announcement, Jesus proclaimed, "Today, salvation has come to this house." The miraculous transformation of Zacchaeus, the amazing exorcism of his excessive greed, the overcoming of his despair, the astounding fulfillment of his search for meaning is nothing less than salvation. Jesus tells us that salvation transformed Zacchaeus. The message of God to us is clear. Salvation transforms our lives. When we accept the salvation that Jesus Christ offers us, salvation transforms our lives. Salvation drives out greed and selfishness, and salvation empowers kindness and justice. Salvation changes how we live. Salvation makes kindness and justice our highest aim. When we accept the salvation that Jesus Christ offers us, salvation restores our peace and our joy and makes us whole again. It is interesting that Luke does not tell us what Jesus said to Zacchaeus to perform the miracle that transformed his life. Luke does not tell us what Jesus said to cleanse Zacchaeus from his crippling greed. Luke does not tell us what Jesus said that fulfilled Zacchaeus' desperate search for meaning. Luke does not tell us those things. But there are clues all through the scriptures of what Jesus might have said to perform the miracle that brought salvation to Zacchaeus' house that day. When I read the words of Proverbs that we heard today, the light bulb went on in my head. Judy will tell you that when the light bulb goes on in my head, it's not always a good thing. But in this case, it was a good thing. The light bulb went on and told me that Jesus may very well have quoted these very words from Proverbs to Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus probably would have known them by heart. Jesus may very well have said, Zacchaeus, God says to you in Proverbs, my child, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments within you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, then you will understand righteousness and justice and fairness and every good path. For the wisdom of God will come into your heart, Zacchaeus, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Zacchaeus, your heart is empty. Your greed cannot fill it up. Your possessions cannot fill it up. Your privilege cannot fill it up, and your power cannot fill it up. But if you turn your heart toward God, the wisdom of God will cast out your pointless greed, and God will fill your painfully empty soul with the joy of kindness. The moment Zacchaeus accepted this message from Jesus was the moment Zacchaeus received salvation. Salvation transformed Zacchaeus. He repented and made his promise. And at that moment, Jesus rejoiced and proclaimed, today, salvation has come to this house. My friends, the message of God is clear. Jesus is telling us that salvation comes from the wisdom of God that opens our hearts to kindness and justice. Jesus invites us to live by the wisdom of God. And when we accept the gift of salvation, the Spirit of God that is within us leaps for joy. Because whatever is right, whatever is fair, whatever is just, fills our souls with kindness, and kindness makes us whole. The salvation that Jesus Christ offered Zacchaeus transformed Zacchaeus by renewing the wisdom of God within him. And the salvation that Jesus Christ offers us transforms our lives by renewing the wisdom of God within us. Salvation makes us whole. When we accept the wisdom of God, when we give our lives to kindness and justice in the name of Jesus, Jesus smiles at us and says, today, salvation has come to your house. Do you know someone who is empty inside? Someone searching for meaning in their life? Someone searching for joy and peace that cannot be bought? The joy and peace we experience when we accept the salvation that Jesus Christ offers through the wisdom of God is meant to be shared. If we find that the salvation Jesus Christ offers us transforms our lives, then we need to look for folks around us who are lost and struggling and trapped in the despair of emptiness. And we need to offer them the salvation that Jesus Christ has offered us. Salvation is kindness and justice practiced in the name of Jesus. Kindness and justice transform our lives with the wisdom of God, which brings peace and joy. We need to offer people the wisdom of God with the hope that they will accept the salvation that Jesus Christ offers them, so that one day we may be able to proclaim with joy to them, today, salvation has come to your house. Amen.
Amen.